Welcome to It's No Accident, a podcast about the challenges of personal injury and wrongful death law in Florida, one of the nation's most complex legal environments.
You'll hear compelling stories about real cases from our law firm in Tallahassee that will help you better understand your rights and protect yourself from the negligence of others.
I'm Mark Nonni.
And I'm Jaeson Homola.
And this is
It's No Accident.
All right, so we got another question that we had some of the viewers send in that it sounds like there's something that happened to someone recently, and basically the question says, I was hit while biking in my neighborhood. The driver of the vehicle is saying that I should have been on the sidewalk instead of on the road. What does Florida law say about that? And I know, this is certainly something that comes up a lot. I know we've both had cases similar to this before, and I think, I guess you had one recently. It wasn't exactly the exact same situation, but it had to do with, I think, someone on a scooter. And it was somewhat similar, and so
Yeah.
what do you remember from that case in terms of how you handled it and the issues that came up in terms of specifically what the law says about what you're supposed to be doing?
Recently, probably within the last maybe 12 months, litigated an issue very similar to this, where my client was on Florida State's campus riding a electric skateboard, and she was in the bike lane. So typically, this is not the way on every street, but on a lot of the streets, especially down on campus, you're going to have a sidewalk, and then you're going to have a curb, and then you're going to have a bike lane, and then you're going to have the lanes of travel for the vehicles. Our client was in the bike lane, and she was on her electric skateboard going on the bike lane, and interestingly, she was going against the grain of, I guess the grain is what I'll call it, of travel. So the cars she's close to the vehicles that are coming towards her. So if she were to reach out to her right, a vehicle would be coming towards her.
Right. She's going in the opposite direction from the vehicle.
Opposite direction of the vehicle, yes. If you look at Florida law, that's actually not the way that you're supposed to be doing it. But it was interesting in her case because it doesn't say anything about electric skateboards. It says stuff about bikes. If you're on a bike, you're supposed to go with the flow of traffic. If you're walking, you're supposed to go against the flow of traffic. Don't ask me why. I'm sure there's reasons for it that a biker might be able to tell you better reasons, but that is what the law says in Florida. If you're on a bike with flow of traffic, walking against flow of traffic.
If you're in the roadway, right?
If you're in the roadway. On a sidewalk, it doesn't matter. On a sidewalk, if you're walking on a sidewalk, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But if you're in that bike lane or you're on the roadway, where there is no sidewalk, that's what Florida law says. And we had an issue in that case because the defense was arguing, well, she was breaking the statute. She was going against the flow of traffic. An electric skateboard's akin to a bicycle. She should have been going with the flow of traffic. And our client was like, look, there's plenty of reasons why I was in the bike lane going the way that I was. Number one, there's a tree that hangs over the bike lane on the other side of the road, and it drops branches, acorns, all sorts of stuff coming out of the tree that then lands in the bike lane. And when you're on an electric skateboard, some of her friends have actually fallen off their skateboard where they're going, wheel gets caught on it, they fly off the skateboard. So she doesn't go on that side of the road. Number two was the age-old argument, everybody else does it. That's the way that everybody does it. That's the industry standard, so to speak. But, it's just human nature. If you go down there and you watch what people are doing on a daily basis, everybody is riding on the bike lane in both directions on that side of the road. And my client even went so far as to sit there for like 4 hours one day, and she videoed all of the people that were going in both directions in that bike lane. And interestingly, the person that hit our client was another student at FSU, and she lived in the apartment complex right next to where this bike lane was, and she lived there for 2 years. She'd been driving down the street, every day while she was in school. So the argument was, well, she should have known that people were going both ways in this bike lane. And when I got her in deposition, she was like, yeah, I've seen people go both ways, but I didn't ever pay attention to how often it was happening, but I'm pretty sure I've seen people going both ways in that bike lane. So, it was a situation where we knew there was going to be some comparative negligence on our client, just because the statute's there. But at the same time, we had some arguments against against their arguments that the statute says she was doing something that she shouldn't be doing.
Sure.
So that's how I handled it. But to answer the question, the way that the law is written in Florida, if you are on your bicycle, you should be going with the flow of traffic. Sidewalk, no. You are not supposed to ride your bike on the sidewalk. I
was about to say that.
You can. People do it all the time. So then you could come up with the argument that people do it all the time. That's why I was doing it. But as a biker, you're actually supposed to ride your bike on the road.
Right.
And there's a whole section of law in Florida that dictates what bikers are supposed to do while they're riding their bike on the road. And they're almost just like vehicles in the sense that they're supposed to give certain hand signals they're supposed to give when they're turning, when they're stopping, and there's certain things that they're supposed to do when they come to intersections. They're supposed to act just like vehicles. And a lot of times you'll see the bike lanes, especially like in the downtown areas that have been created for these bikes. And if those are available, you're supposed to ride your bike in those. So if the argument's being made that this person should have been on the sidewalk, that is not correct.
Right.
The sidewalk's actually only for people to be walking on.
Yeah.
Unless there's some sort of local ordinance that says otherwise, the sidewalk is only for walking.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's like you said. I mean, the law is basically that the bikes just have just as much right to be on the road as vehicles do, right?
Yeah.
And you see a lot of, avid bikers and stuff. A lot of times they'll see the bumper stickers like "share the road" and stuff like that, and that's kind of where that comes from. Like they have just as much of a right to be there as anybody else. And going back to like what you were saying though, like there's a pretty good argument. Like in your case, even though your client was going the wrong way in the bike lane, the argument being the obvious of, if you're in a car and you're paying attention, why did you run into this person?
Right.
The same kind of thing. Like if you're like basically, I guess the argument like in your case was the defendant saying, well, I didn't expect her to be coming from that way. Right. So it's like, what, you didn't look both ways before you pulled out?
Right.
Like, if you're paying attention, you don't run into somebody, right?
Right.
And I've even had, like you said, you're not supposed to ride a bike on a sidewalk. I've had cases like that over the years though, where someone was riding a bike on a sidewalk and got hit by a car. And that was, and the defense had an argument saying you weren't supposed to be riding your bike there. And my arguments were the same as what you said. Like, people do it all the time. Everybody knows it. You see it all the time. And if you're driving a car and you're paying attention, it's not too hard to avoid hitting somebody on a bike.
It shouldn't be an issue, right? Especially, that was my other argument in that case too. I mean, they were on Florida State's campus, and it was during a time when school was in session. It wasn't summer session. I mean, we're talking about like spring or fall semester, where there are, thousands of pedestrians walking around, riding skateboards, riding electric skateboards, bikes, whatever kids are, one wheels, whatever they're riding nowadays. There's people everywhere. So, you have the law doesn't necessarily say this, but, there should be a heightened sense of awareness when you've got that amount of pedestrians walking in and around the area that you're at, as opposed to like, if you're driving down the interstate.
Right.
You wouldn't expect to see someone crossing the interstate. Exactly. Whereas if you're driving your car on Florida State's campus during spring semester, and you're in a congested area where people are going to and from class, you should expect that someone might pop out of nowhere. And, you shouldn't be looking at your phone or, paying attention to the radio or doing this, that, or the other thing.
For sure.
This conversation continues and much more on the next episode of It's No Accident.